Thank you for joining us today. Welcome to our attendees who are with us from a number of locations. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you happen to be joining us from. My name is Ed, and I'll be moderating today's discussion of shelf-ready packaging. That's a topic that we've seen getting a lot of attention in the CPG packaging world these days. As we start, I'd like to make a couple housekeeping announcements. First, this webinar is going to be recorded.
Ed, are you still with us?
Can you hear me?
Now we can. You're back.
Okay. So just quickly running through these housekeeping notes, we're going to record today's webinar, and we'll share a recording of it with you in a couple days. Please submit questions as we go along using the question panel. We'll try to answer as many as we can at the end of the session today, and those that we can't, we'll follow up by email within a couple days. And I'm sure that many of you are going to want to chat with the panelists, and we'll share information for them, contact information for them at the end of the webinar.
Terrific.
So first, it's my pleasure to introduce our panelists. John Panaseni, who's also joined by a colleague, and Chet Rutledge are our panelists. And John and Chet, why don't you just each take a moment and introduce yourselves to the folks who have joined us today.
Sure. Thanks, Ed. Well, my name is John Panaseni. My background is I've got over 30 years in the packaging industry, with the majority of the packaging equipment side of the industry. I've worked for companies as diverse as Bartelt, R.A. Jones, and Oystar, and currently am the CEO of Rovima North America. And I'm fortunate enough today to have with me Ingo Hamel, who is our group leader of packaging systems. He's been with Rovima for 19 years and is currently responsible for the end-of-line solutions with Rovima here in Germany. The nice part of having Ingo join us is that he's got a great deal of experience that he can bring from his European perspective, which should be helpful during the day.
Hi, I'm Chet Rutledge. I'm with Vanguard Packaging now. I'm the Director of Retail Ready Marketing Solutions for Vanguard, an independent corrugated supplier headquartered in Kansas City, Missouri, with offices in Bentonville, Arkansas, and St. Louis as well. My background is varied, but I've been in the packaging industry for a little over 20 years, both on the sales side of the business and in the sourcing side of the business. I was started in corrugated packaging with International Paper, went from there from selling boxes to buying boxes for a large protein provider here in Arkansas, Tyson Foods. So did that for a number of years, and then from there I moved into the retail segment where I was Director of Packaging for a little over 9 years at Walmart for all their private brands, particularly on the food and consumable side of the business. So I've worked internationally with teams in the UK and in Canada in developing retail-ready solutions, shelf-ready solutions over the past 8-9 years. So hopefully we'll be able to touch on some things that really just provide a little bit of thought as you begin the process, and it's actually the journey of moving into shelf-ready packaging.
Perfect. Thanks, gentlemen. And speaking of that journey, let's start first with just a quick look to understand where the attendees are in terms of their shelf-ready journey. So we've got a poll question that we'd like to get some feedback on. Does your company currently do any shelf-ready packaging? Go ahead and please select a yes or a no, and a couple seconds we'll be ready to go. Last call for submissions. right, so gentlemen, for your information, there's some interesting feedback here. 83% of the attendees currently do shelf-ready packaging, 17% do not. So with that background, let's jump into the first panel discussion. We're joined today by folks from many different industries. It looks from registrations as diverse as food and household chemical, pet care, and even automotive. So clearly, this is getting a lot of attention. But that really kind of begs us to start with this first question. People have been talking about shelf-ready packaging for years, and now suddenly it seems to be getting a lot more attention. What's changed? Why is this suddenly such a pressing topic for CPG manufacturers as we come to the end of 2017 and look toward 2018?
Sure, it's a good question, and it came to us at the start of this that we have a bit of a diverse group of participants that are, some of whom are outside the U.S. market. But I think the driver for the U.S. market has been a significant shift by one of the major retailers that is now requiring it of their suppliers. I think that's really driven by the competitive landscape that's out there. There are a number of companies that are trying to make great inroads into that space. And in order to compete against them, it's a requirement that they're going to need to have as well, because those competitors do it. Chet, do you have perspective on that?
Yeah, to your point, there is a large push that over the past year and a half, from the retail perspective, from coming out of Bentonville here, there's a large push towards retail ready. And I think there's a couple of key reasons behind that. One is the competitive market, the competitive landscape. There are a couple of deep discounters. You're familiar with them in Germany there, Aldi and Lidl come into town here in the U.S. They're positioned for growth, but as a deep discounter, they have a low labor model. And from store visits and if you've got any opportunity to shop in any of those stores, you'll get a chance to see that a vast majority of what they do is in a form of a shelf-ready package, just because it makes it easily accessible. And it's easy to stock the shelves, and it's fast and it's efficient. There's challenges with it as well, so it really has to become part of a systemic approach. So competitive landscape is one, but then there's also the external push from e-commerce. Retailers as a whole are finding every way that they can to have, how do they combat against external suppliers and all the market influences. So driving cost out of the system, looking at where they can on labor, and also from a sustainability standpoint, which in many cases people tend to think of shelf-ready packaging as counterintuitive to sustainability, but sustainability is a key piece of it as well, in materials optimization and right sizing of packaging and all those elements that become part of it. So it's not just a real simple once and done solution, but it really is, and that's why I say it's a journey. And you have to evaluate a lot of different aspects, because of packaging, we're asking it to do things that really are very complex when you look at a complex delivery system and supply chain that most of our retail products are going through today. So the push from and actually support and understanding from several retailers is part of this, but it also now comes back to the CPG companies to really, how do you blend that together, because you're supplying multiple different retailers. So you have to look at it's a very multifaceted approach that you have to take to be able to come up with a viable solution.
And I think that's the hope today, that we can provide some insights as to how to do that holistically and efficiently, and maybe save some people some painful mistakes that some of our customers or experiences have taught us.
So, John, that's a good segue, actually. Chet, you talked about how retailers are driving a lot of this. John, you just mentioned how there's ways to approach it to try to avoid problems and find the benefits. But let's talk about it from the point of benefits. Everyone knows that the retailers stand to gain quite a bit. But what are the benefits that they seek? And how about for the CPG manufacturers themselves, and even for the consumers? What kinds of benefits are available for those stakeholders?
Well, it's a good point, a good question, Ed. because everyone often thinks it is simply just the retailer. One of the big benefits that we experience, Rovima happens to do quite a bit of business in flexible packaging, and one of the potential concerns with flexible packaging is you don't want to handle that product a lot, particularly if it's fragile. And by keeping it in a shelf-ready display that can get handled once with minimal contact and minimal damage to the product. So there's certainly, to the CPG manufacturer, they'll get to the shelf a product that's been handled less and hopefully give the consumer a greater experience.
Plus you end up with less wrinkles in the packs, better shape of the pack, like it's standing upright in the transport, especially if you talk about standard pouches. So it's a much better shelf appearance, much more valuable impression of the product.
Chet, what do you think?
Well, I know we'll talk more about it with a couple of the other questions, but briefly, shelf-ready packaging in many cases can provide a lot of opportunity for on-shelf. One, on-shelf availability by being able to stock it faster, more efficiently, and with less trouble from a store labor standpoint, but also from a space and cube utilization. I worked on a project a couple of years ago with shredded cheese, and as we converted from a lay flat pouch bag to a stand-up gusseted pouch, we were actually able to reduce that footprint that the pouch took up on the shelf, and over a 20-foot segment, we're able to gain almost 4 feet of space on the shelf. So that's new space that's available, and that's valuable real estate for new products or expansion of existing products. So it's, again, it's not just a once and done or a very simple. You have to look at, there's a multiple of different aspects and benefits, and there's going to be some give and take. But in that particular situation, we were able to actually pick up space for more new products just by being able to optimize the geometry of the package.
So increasing sell-through, possible net cost reduction, improvements in sustainability, maybe consistency in the package and put up some more facing. So actually a wide range of benefits, not just for the retailer, but across the stakeholders, it sounds like.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Let's take...
To add one last, obviously, to the consumer packaged good company, a stock out is obviously not what they want, but nor does the consumer want that. They go to the market for their favorite product, and when it's not on the shelf, it's a disappointment. So, it actually can have benefits all the way through to every one of those stakeholders for sure.
Understand. Let's take the opportunity to just quickly look at the planning for projects. 83% of the companies are currently doing shelf-ready packaging, but given the emphasis on growing this capability, there's got to be more companies that are planning on adding that capability, or companies want to be supplementing it. So we're going to another poll here quickly, just to see about projects that are planned, whether they're new product lines or expanded capacity. We'd appreciate everyone taking a minute and selecting a yes or no for whether you've got new projects planned. A couple more seconds. So actually a very similar result, gentlemen, to the question about who's currently doing it. 83% I think we're currently doing it, 17% we're not, and interestingly 82% are planning on, they've got new projects planned. So some interesting information there.
Absolutely.
All right, so we heard a little bit earlier about the some of the lessons that have been learned from what's been done in Europe, and Chet mentioned that Aldi and Lidl were on their way in. Well, let's dive into that a little bbit more. Some of the lessons that can be learned from a fairly established and mature SRP infrastructure in Europe.
Yeah, and I'll let Ingo get into the details, but in essence, they've done a very good job of working backwards with the retailer from the store shelf, and then working the supply chain backwards to the case sizes. Do they want 2 deep, trays deep, And then from that, what does the size of the pallet look like to be optimized, size of the case, size of the package. And they've literally worked from the store and what the retailer wants and worked backwards. Is that?
Yeah, that's true. Basically, what you have to do when you start those projects, it's really that you need to look what the retailer wants, what your customer basically wants. That starts from the case sizing, the number of products per case. It goes as far as even discussing if a customer needs a pre-commissioned case, like for Aldi and Lidl, you will find at least here in Europe. I don't know if they have the same strategy in the States, but here they would have the requirement that you can have an assortment case of so and so many percent of product A and so many percent of product B in a case, which can make it complicated. Like you need really buffer systems, or you need to store the products and then unpack them again to make the assortment packs. And that's quite complicated. But that is really what you need to consider. And then, of course, you need to go through the whole logistic chain. You need to see how is your retailer set up, if he's handling the cases in his logistic centers, and how is he bringing the products in his stores, and where is he basically preparing the goods for restocking his shops. Now, that's the main things. You know, just look at your current formats and you say, okay, I go shelf ready and I'm using the same case counts like I do now in American case cartons. It is different. You really need to look what is the need of my customer, of the retailer, basically. Yeah? That's the main important point. And then you need to decide what is my supply chain. Do I need to have a case which can withstand rough roads or moisture or whatever? Or do I, well, moisture is the most unlikely, but the rough roads and several handling of the case, this is quite common. And then you need to decide, do I use a two-piece case, or can it be made of a single wraparound, like a wraparound case, which is typically more robust? So these are the main things to consider when you start those projects, and these are the main lessons. You just to understand the logistic chain, the requirements, and ultimately also look at your pallet utilization.
So, Chet, from the retail perspective, as you've watched the European retailers start to make inroads into the U.S., we just heard a good recap of some of the lessons learned technically. What do you see kind of in terms of function in the stores and the impact on retail here?
So I think it's interesting because one of the fundamental things that I had found several years ago as I was working with some of my partners in the UK was there was an industry alignment between a lot of the retailers there in the UK. So, for example, Marks and Spencer and Asda and several of those retailers there in the UK, they all, as an association, agreed on some standards, which essentially are, if you look at a lot of the shelf-ready guidelines and the retail-ready guidelines that are in use here in the U.S. today and in North America, between part of what I had helped write in Canada and U.S., looking from a North American perspective, the fundamentals are all the same. They maybe have slightly different language, but the fundamentals are basically the same. So that's a key to this. And one of the key reasons why we're now starting to see as much of a push, it goes right back to the first question, is you've got a major retailer, the largest retailer, has now said, yes, retail ready is the way to go, shelf ready, we want it. So now as a CPG, a consumer packaged goods company, you have to look at it. How do I now begin to align or think of my structure, because I'm supplying multiple different retailers or multiple different outlets? How do we now optimize as many of those as we can to where we've got the same production outputs and footprints, maybe just slightly different print configurations, so we can utilize same manufacturing practices and equipment and things of that nature. So it's taking those multiple different outlets and put them, somehow how do you optimize and combine those into similar footprints, similar case packs, and meet those different requirements. So industry alignment in Europe was probably, in my mind, one of the fundamental keys to success and being able to drive that forward. So I think we're in a position now where we can begin to see that, because it's really here in North America, it was establishing economy of scale to be able to meet the manufacturing requirements and manufacturing demand. So I think we're in a good position now to be able to really capitalize on that.
Good discussion. Our next question really goes to, it's probably the first question in most conversations about shelf-ready packaging, the cost impact, and the blow that many CPG manufacturers fear they're going to take to their already compressed margins. So what do you gentlemen have to say about that? How, does it mean necessarily that a manufacturer is going to absorb a big cost increase, or are there ways around that?
So that's a great question, and we had an interesting dialogue about this question in advance of the call, and Ingo had a very unique perspective from the European side, and his answer was, it really depends. It depends on the region of the shelf, what level you're at. If you're at the bottom level of the shelf, shelf-ready may look different and may be a bit more simplistic than what it might look like at eye level. I think the immediate assumption is that it's a tray or tray and lid, and that's where everyone goes straight to when they think shelf-ready, and that's not necessarily true. It really depends on the product, price point, its location on the shelf. All of those factors can play into it, and so, Ingo's point to me was, he said, John, there are RSC cases that can be shelf-ready. They've got an opening at the top. It can go into the bottom shelf, and you can reach it. It supports the requirements of the retailer, and virtually is very low in terms of the cost implications.
Yeah, you find 400-gram packs, so basically 1 pound pasta bag in Aldi here for 39 € a bag. So you cannot afford a fancy packing. They use an RSC case with the oval-shaped hole in the top, basically, where you can grab and take out the product. It's not in the higher shelf region. Yeah. So.
Chad, I saw a knowing grin on your face. It looks like you've had a lot of these price conversations.
Yeah, I have, especially over the years. And it seems like this is always the #1 question that comes up, and it's always invariably a knee-jerk reaction of, oh, it's going to cost more. Not necessarily is that the case. Many times designs of packaging can be developed to fit within existing equipment, maybe within the existing framework as it is today. And that could be a simple design, could be moving from a regular RSC, a regular slotted carton, to a perforated case that has an access panel or a knockout panel on it. There's five basic designs that I put together or helped create and put together as fundamental designs in the guidelines that are now put out from a Walmart perspective. It was a die-cut RSC, a 2-piece HSC body and cover, which essentially is a tray, a stadium tray with a lid. There's a tray with shrink overwrap that typically used with canned products. Then there's the 5-panel RSC, which is a patented design that Vanguard has, but it's a design that's available for multiple use, that has an extra width panel that comes across a die-cut section that comes off clean, so you've got a nice clean front edge on the package so it displays well. Then there's another design that works in a very similar fashion, the Cabrio case that was designed by Delcor. Those were all, and it's an automated design, but that gives you a wide range of capabilities and products, but those are fundamental designs. The first response is it's always going to cost more, and that's not necessarily the case. There was an article just published actually in this month's, I think it was Packaging Digest. Hershey went out and as they've looked at some of their packaging for the seasonal use, It was in a 2-piece box. They optimized that design and ended up saving 32% in material. So that's a sustainability win, and that's a direct cost impact if you're reducing the material. The opposite of that in many cases can be true, where you're saying, well, I'm adding more material because I'm going to a smaller case size, but you have to look at the complete system by optimizing the flow through, the throughput at the plant, but also the palletization, unitization from a pallet fit to a truck fit to on shelf. I mean, many of those I've seen over the years, as much as a simple 10% reduction in freight because you've added an extra layer of product because you've been able to take the headspace out of the product. And so it's not just a simple, it's going to cost more, but I think that's the easy approach. The hard work that has to be done is you have to evaluate it and look at the supply chain and the impacts. And at the end of the day, when you look at it from a holistic standpoint, you're creating a delivery system for the product. If you can reduce damage, improve freight, improve your throughput, reduce labor, I mean, many of the offsets outweigh the increases that occur along the way. You have to get to the point where's the true P&L on this, not just the individual silos along the way, which I think that's what most of us tend to run into. So looking at it as a holistic approach, a systemic approach, it's a delivery system. It can be a win-win for everybody.
So it sounds like you're saying
a soapbox on that one.
It sounds like you're saying a shelf-ready packaging project then isn't just a packaging change; it's an organizational change management issue where you've got to have merchandising and sales and marketing and logistics and traffic and process and packaging and all those groups involved to really look at this holistically.
Yeah, absolutely.
Go ahead, Ingo.
Yeah, I'd like to reflect on the main 5 case styles which you mentioned, and in our presentations, a lot of times we also have just like basically what you probably can confirm when we make those trainings, we have like 5, 6 case styles, not more than that. But I like to reflect on the one style where you say for cans, a lot of times it's a tray with an overwrap, which is true, but it might go back to the question lessons learned. What we have here in Europe, we do a lot of waste separation. So the retailers try to avoid having paper and plastic to get rid of when they stock the products. I don't know if this is a trend in the States as well, but here we would try to avoid having film materials to unpack from, or to have film material as a waste. So retailers want just cardboard as waste material when they stock the products.
Is there any trend, Chet, from your experience to that topic?
Yeah, it's design. It's intentional design where there's a specific term for it that I can't remember right off. But it's the packaging should be designed to use similar materials or like materials whenever possible. And a lot of that, from a recovery standpoint here in the U.S., is dependent on infrastructure and recovery networks. So that's a definite part of the development process is looking at it from a design for recovery. Can it be recovered? And with most of the shelf-ready packaging, all you're doing is you're taking a corrugated box, in most cases, that's used for delivery and shipment and transit that normally would be discarded and products stocked individually on the shelf. All you're doing now is you're asking that package to go just a little bit further, and it goes that extra 10 feet, ends up on the shelf, and now it becomes a communications vehicle for brand, for product description, for a lot of different things. But yet, at the end of the day, it's going to come off the shelf as an empty box and go into a baler and be recovered. So that's a good utilization of the package. So yes, it's design with intent is a key piece of it.
All right, so we've got one more poll question. We know that a large number of attendees are currently doing it. We know that a large number are planning new new projects for it. But the last question that we're wondering is, what's the timeline for this to really become mainstream? Not just early adopters, but when do you think the market's going to really go this way? We've got three choices: 2018, 19, or 20. We'd love for everyone to jump in. Got a few more people still to cast their votes. I want to get all these perspectives. All right, I'm going to close the poll now. And here's some interesting data for you gentlemen. 21% think it's going to be 2018, and 21% think it's going to be 2020. And so that means that the vast majority, 60%, think that we're about 18 months away from this really going mainstream and getting traction. So let's keep going with our conversation. And the next topic we've kind of touched on a little bit, but if you know that cost mitigation really requires that systemic organization-wide approach, it makes it pretty complex. Change management is tough stuff. What would you say are the key steps in managing an SRP transformation project?
Well, I'll turn to you and your experience with your Peter.
Well, I think we talked about it a couple of times during that conversation. Basically, that you need to know what your retailer wants to do, and we said that you need to look at your pallet utilization and at the function of your packaging, what you need. Yeah. Do you need it for presentation or for protection? Will your customers basically accept if there's a corrugated board in the shelves? I've seen projects in the States where customers are packing the products in a solid board case and then put it into a corrugated American case to ship it out in the store, where they take out the solid board case display basically. So these would be the main steps. You first need to identify the needs of your customer, and then that's what we said earlier. You work backwards through the pallet. You need to know where your product has to be positioned. You need to know, can I put it into a tray and put it in a lower shelf region? So I need a pillow bag, or do I need a toy style bag, or in the block bottom bag? So the key step is to identify what is my target, how many products do I have on this line, and do all these products need to be packed in the same way, or do I need a flexible line, or whatsoever? This is very dependent on the business. We have contract packers in our customer portfolio, and they have a loading machine and have a American case erector in front of it, a tray erector in front of it, and a hooding machine after it. So they basically can do all sort of case styles with it. It's quite dependent. Yeah? So there's no real answer, but of course you should not miss out to have a clear mind. What is the requirements for the whole logistic chain and for my retailers?
And I guess the one comment that you make so often, you get asked, I need to do this.
Yeah.
What should my case size be?
Yeah, true.
And that question just misses the whole point that you described, which is it really starts with a discussion at the very front end of your business with your customer, which is the retailer. What are you trying to achieve? What is the shelf depth? What should the pack size be? It may mean some slight changes to pack sizes to optimize, but there's opportunity as you move down this path to have those discussions, and the more you can understand it, then the more efficient you can be as you work backwards from that. And that's really, I think,
that's one of the things we do as well. Like we do the bag makers and the case packers. A lot of time we can guarantee a customer that the product will fit into the case and test it as a system, things like that. So that's a lot of times, a task in those projects, or quite challenging.
So Chet, you've watched a lot of these implementations from a very different perspective. When they're successful, what do you see as key steps in managing it?
So I think, again, this is counterintuitive, because one of the key steps is actually pushing back. And I'll clarify that just briefly. You have to identify the stakeholders, and everybody, every stakeholder has a slightly different viewpoint in it. If you're talking with a retailer, and my experience has been many of the buyers may make unrealistic requests because they've got unrealistic timelines or they've got an unrealistic goal as you would view it. But I don't think that any that I've ever encountered would ever have unreasonable responses or be unrealistic if you have your facts in front of you, if you understand and you know your business. That's a key piece of it. So you can say, instead of just going, oh, it's going to cost more, or no, we can't do that, it's here's how we can do that. So providing some opportunities along the way. You have to understand, from a sales standpoint, they're worried about cost. From a purchasing standpoint, it's around cost. And what's that going to look like? The marketing folks are going to be interested in brand management, brand recognition. Warehouse logistics, they're going to be interested in, how does it flow through their warehouse? What kind of damage do they have? What kind of handling requirements do they have? What's the impacts there? But also from a manufacturing perspective, the operations side of it is going to be, do I have to change it? What do I have to change in my system? And minimizing as many of those as you can is a key piece of it. So it's identifying the stakeholders, understanding what their needs and requirements are, but being realistic about it, but also being, you have to have open dialogue, and sometimes that does provide for some pushback. And the pushback could be in the form of, I can't do that today, but I can. And I think that's part of the reason why 60% of the folks, the respondents on that last question are looking about 18 months out, because you can take short-term, intermediate, and long-term approach. And the short-term would be, what can I fit in my existing equipment? So if I'm running a case erector and a pouching system, if it's just changing case count, maybe that's a fairly simple thing. Or if it requires just a few change parts for a system, maybe I can do that in 3 months or less, 3 to 4 months. So that's a short-term opportunity. It's more of a drop-in solution. An intermediate might be, I've got to have some line modifications, some different some modifications to existing equipment I've got, or maybe a few new parts or pieces to the puzzle, which would maybe take 6 to 12 months. And that may be something in the pack out system. Maybe it's you've got to add something into that line that's a new piece of equipment that may or may not be off the shelf. So it's about a 6 to 12 month. That's an intermediate. Then the longer term is the more planned, strategic approach to it that says, I'm going from a lay flat bag to a stand-up gusseted pouch, and what equipment do I have to have, and now what line modifications. And the benefit becomes, can I get improved throughput by automation and planning towards that. And so that involves a lot of things, from capital planning to execution. So again, it's not a simple process, but having a strategic approach to it. And that's where I do think in the long term, that's where you can really hone those benefits of materials, case optimization, freight utilization, warehouse handling, labor, and all of those benefits then come in the form of a complete package. But the beauty of it as well is, if you can improve out of stocks by being able to have more product available for the customer to purchase and enjoy that product, you're going to actually improve sales. So I've seen this in products that I've tested over the past 5 years. For the most part, by having more product available, reducing the out of stocks, I saw anywhere from at least a 5% increase in sales just by having product available. So there's a lot of soft benefits that come with that as well. So planning the process, that's the key. Have an open dialogue, and you've got to look at it from there's multiple different stages in the process. Each one of those have value, and identifying that's really the critical piece. in my mind.
So it almost sounds like for some CPG manufacturers, they shouldn't be waiting to have a retailer push on them to do this, but if there's that big a sell-through opportunity for a sell-through bump, this is something they maybe should be thinking about proactively.
Absolutely.
Well, in your last answer, Chet, you mentioned stand-up gusseted pouches, and that's one of the things that seems to often pop up when we talk about SRP. Ingo mentioned products on a lower shelf that may be in a simpler package, and the upper shelf may be a little bit more elaborate. Stand-up pouches seem to be a frequent part of a shelf-ready conversation. Why is that?
Well, and I think we touched on it briefly earlier, Ed. Number one, the stand-up pouch does best if it stays standing. So you create this bag that has the product sitting at the base of it. If you take that product and then lay it on its side and rearrange the product inside the bag and ship it, when it gets out of that case, then have to actually shake it out and get it to resettle again at the base. So there's that step in the process. So it's ideal for many of these stand-up pouches to remain standing after they're produced. And the second benefit of doing that is, as we touched on a little bit earlier as well, is it minimizes damage to the product, particularly for cookies and crackers and fragile products, because you're not handling it more than once. It basically gets placed into the display and then at that point gets put on the shelf. So hopefully a better customer experience as a result. And that's our perspective on it.
Yep, yeah, that's the main reason.
So from my perspective and from a retail perspective, one of the values of a stand-up pouch is you can take it off a peg and put it on a shelf, which allows you to be able then to put it into a shelf-ready delivery system. The rationale behind that's pretty simple. If I'm making multiple movements to stock individual items, so if I got a dozen in a case and I'm making 12 individual motions to put this on a peg, I can then take it off the peg and reduce that in labor, put it into one unit and only have to stock one unit at a time. That could be a 12x labor reduction. Now, it's not going to show up in the form of actual headcount reduction, but what it will do is it'll improve stocking cases per hour stocked, or just really, if you can stock one section and keep that candy section full, you can move over, you can reapply that labor somewhere else in a more timely fashion. So that's a real key benefit to it, but it also, to John's point, the product, the usability of it, the protection of it, the less touches, the less times you have to move it, the less likely for damage or product getting somehow not being in a pristine state. So they go hand in hand. And there's also, with stand-up pouches, one of the things you've got from a consumer standpoint is many of these will have reseal features on it for once, then when you get the product home, it's resealable, and to be able to extend shelf life or product, the usage, the customer experience continues even after they get it home in a more favorable light.
So to the earlier point about how there's benefits across the stakeholders, not only the retailer, that's a great point about consumers. They like stand-up pouches because it's easier for them to use. Are you going to add something, John?
No, agree, 100%.
All right, so we've got one more panel discussion question, and then we're going to open it up for audience questions. And we've already kind of touched on this, the biggest mistakes that you see in SRP implementations and the biggest missed opportunities. So let's not rehash those that we've already covered, but certainly call out any that you think are particularly important. And if you've got other insights that we haven't touched on yet, this would be a great place to drop those in.
Well, I think we covered it pretty much. I think that mentioned a lot of times that you need to look at all the stakeholders. You shouldn't miss out opportunities to save on materials and optimize your logistics. That's probably the main mistake you can do if you miss out that opportunity.
And it happens that you get SKU creep, where you add different sizes and different package configurations. this discussion gives you an opportunity to maybe revisit that and do some rationalization and optimization as a part of this dialogue. And one of the key messages is not to lose that opportunity. It's a wonderful time to do that and optimize the entire supply chain.
And I guess if people are thinking that 2019 is the year this really takes off, what's the planning cycle? As you talk about this being a great opportunity to do it, John, is this something that people begin working on in the middle of 2017, or when they're at PAC Expo, or 2018 rather, or when they're at PAC Expo in 2017, should this be on the top of the list?
I would agree with the latter, that it should be at the top of the list. And as Chet said, there are phases to this, but a long-term view of this, it takes some time to do it right when you involve all the stakeholders. So I would begin sooner rather than later, and again, because there are benefits throughout the stakeholders.
All right, so we're going to go to...
Hey, Ed.
Yeah, go ahead, Chad.
Yeah, Ed, there's one thing I want to add to that. I think this is a great opportunity for suppliers, manufacturers, product manufacturers. Use your packaging people, your packaging contacts, and you can develop other packaging contacts, but use them as a resource. They can be a consultant of sorts, and that we do that a lot. I know. Here's the real value of that, and I would also suggest is not to do that in a vacuum. Typically, you need to have the primary package supplier, the protective packaging supplier. It's a system that all has to work together. So if you get them working collaboratively together, you can create some really good solutions. And I think that's one of the things that in many cases over the years we've all seen, that it tends to be a finger pointing exercise to say, well, the bag didn't work, and so the box guy says the bag didn't work, and the bag guy says, well, the box didn't work, and then we all turn around and go, well, it was the glue that held everything together. And so being able to put them together as a team, you can create some really good solutions.
Let's take that a step further. Do you think there's an opportunity for CPG manufacturers to proactively use this as a competitive tool themselves? In other words, one company going to the major retailers and saying, we know you want this, you may not have demanded it yet, but we can start feeding it to you proactively. Do you think that's a way for companies to pick up business?
Well, if you haven't picked up from the Southern dialect, I would say the first one to the well gets the biggest drink. So, yeah, you absolutely should be doing that.
Agreed.
All right, cool. So along those lines of using expertise out there as consulting to help you manage this, here's some information on both of these companies that are represented here, along with URLs. And there's also a link, which probably won't work on your screen, but you could certainly type into your computer and download a really great shelf-ready packaging planning guide that John and Chet have collaborated on producing. So you get that at rovimasrp.com. So now we're going to go to some questions, and while we do that, we'll leave this contact information up in the background. We've got a question from Aricelli, who's asking about any experience with shelf-ready packaging in emerging markets, any trends that you've seen or insights that you can offer.
Well, if we look at emerging markets, it's the main challenge is to, if it's not the material side, it's more, you get decent materials there as well, it's more the supply chain. Emerging markets, if we, a lot of times cases are used even as building stairs in front of a truck so you can unload it. It is a quite delicate matter. I mean, if you really, if the challenge is that you have a factory in an emerging market and you want to do products for export, what we have a lot of time is that shelf ready then is a more robust case and a more simple case. Maybe not a case made of two pieces like a tray and a lid. It might well be a wraparound case with perforations in it. We have machines in emerging markets like Thailand, for example, or Indonesia, but it is still that a lot of these products are, if it's really for the domestic market, they would a lot of times unpack it and present the individual boxes in their shelves. They have have little shops. They don't have much shelf space available. So then really the question is, what are you trying to do in these emerging markets? If you do it for export, of course you need to develop it then for the containers or whatever. If it's for the domestic market, it is really challenging then. That's my answer to it.
Chet, any insights on emerging market trends?
It's a very challenging and very challenging market because, as Engel said, there's a lot of times there's limited shelf space. But I think one of the keys really is thinking about how do you make it easy to open more so, but it still has to survive through a very harsh distribution channel. But things that you can do to eliminate the use of a knife to cut a box open helps reduce the damage and throwaway that's naturally going to occur. And I've seen, and actually that was one of the things I'd seen in one of the Central American countries I was recently visiting. People are going to make our shelf-ready packaging out of whatever you send in. So they're cutting boxes and they're cutting them open and tearing them open to access the product. So making it easily accessible is actually, that's one of the fundamental, the 5 easies that make it, fundamental of shelf-ready packaging. So it's an inherent need to be done, but it's also one of those things that does create a lot of damaged products invariably. So making it easy to open, easy to identify, and easy to recognize and understand, those are critical.
Good.
What is a typical issue in the emerging markets? A lot of times they would have requests for having these dividers inside the boxes, like you would have it for bottles typically, and then they want to put block bottom bags in these compartments. There is really challenging demands when the projects come in, and a lot of times demands which do not really go well together with automation. So it is difficult, but the main point is really the supply chain, and like Chet was saying, having it robust but easy to open. That's the challenge.
All right, next we've got a question from Melanie that I think is going to probably resonate with everybody listening today. She says, it seems like a lot of time there's not a lot of discussion. We get a call from our sales rep when they leave a retailer meeting, and suddenly we've got this mandate and this deadline. She's asking for suggestions on how to kind of broach the subject with retailers in advance to participate, maybe before the pushback stage, as you mentioned, Chet, more preemptively to foster the conversation so it's not a sudden deadline that gets dropped on them.
Why don't you start with that, with your experience in the retail world?
Well, I think it's incumbent on the supplier and the sales team to be bringing solutions. It's being proactive instead of reactive. And that's a very important thing. Trying to anticipate what some of the pain points are along the way instead of just, there's a difference between selling and just taking orders. And being proactive is a very, very essential part of that. So looking at it, quite frankly, from a damage reduction, if you were to look at that, you can apply that as a shelf-ready opportunity through some testing, through some evaluation, but having some data to back it up, but bringing it, nobody's mad at money. So if you can find a way to optimize and reduce damage and improve the look of product on shelf and bringing that to a buyer, may not get a positive response because maybe they're focused on something else, but you never know until you ask that question. But I think being proactive, bringing things to the table is a very, very crucial part of it. And some of the best sales representatives, some of the best brands that I've seen over the years have been the ones that have done that. And those, you develop yourself as a professional, set yourself aside, set yourself up to be that go-to. That's an absolute essential part of it. And bringing solutions instead of just trying to answer some problems if you can do that in advance, you're much, much better off.
So speaking of being proactively involved in the conversation, Jorge, I'm guessing from the question, he's probably in an engineering department. He's saying one of the challenges that they see is a requirement where the secondary packaging is changed to do shelf ready, but the primary packaging, people want to try to keep it the same and try to figure out how to mash this up together. Is that realistic, or is a shelf ready project that changes the secondary packaging really by definition going to change the primary packaging as well?
Not necessarily. Depends. I mean, if you now use an RSC and you pack candies and you have them flattened inside the RSC case and you want to open them in the lower shelf region and just have an open tray, you can probably use the same loading system and everything. It's like just changing from an RSC to probably one with a perforation inside or so. It's if you go pillow bags into stand-up orientation, then this is possible. It does not necessarily mean that you really change the bag itself.
Chet, I guess that means, though, you may sacrifice some of the opportunity you mentioned, for instance, to take something off a peg and put it on a shelf, or to increase the number of facings by changing the package size. What are your thoughts on it?
As we see with most of the products and with packaging and all of it in general, it's an evolution. So there's not going to be that one size fits all. And yeah, there's going to be many cases where it could be a simple change to existing secondary, tertiary type packaging to meet the base criteria. But then there's always the process improvement of what's the next phase or the next step in this, and can you get there? It's an evolution, and it's constantly evolving, and it's constantly changing, and that's probably the one key thing from a retail perspective. It's always changing, and whatever you're doing today is not what you're going to be doing tomorrow. So you have to constantly be looking out for what's the next new thing or what's the next opportunity.
I got a vigorous nod from Ingo. It looks like you've seen a lot of that sort of evolution.
I mean, it goes in the very similar direction like the question before, where Chet was saying you need to be proactive. And in order to be proactive, you need to make up your mind if you need a flexible system which you can modify, which you can adapt. So like there's many machines, classic wraparound case packers with a lane distributor in front of it or an indexing chain, whatever you have. It is typically made to pack a wraparound case, that's it. And there is also other systems where you can do a wraparound and a tray and lid on it, or if you go to loading systems which typically are more flexible by just using different case erecting and sealing equipment at it. It is not always saying that robotic is the key of which will solve all your problems, but it needs to be a clever system which can be flexible. So this is something which helps you to be proactive, and yeah, that's just an advice I can give. But at the same side, you need to be careful, not lock yourself into one single lane, which is totally flexible, and you change it every day 3 times or 10 times. It's a balance, yeah. But you need to have a flexible system to be ready for the future. Yeah.
So let's squeeze in one more question, and Brian, I think, is really asking about what you touched on earlier, Chet, about your short, medium, and longer term things, and we just heard some about it in the last answer, but what short-term options do you have to move in this direction without really just changing the entire line? Any quick thoughts on that?
Yeah, real simple. Could be if you're using a 2-piece system today, that's maybe an HSC and a cover. It could be something that could be could it change to a I don't know, the 5-panel RSC? Could it change to a die-cut RSC? Could you go to a stadium tray and fit existing equipment? The other part of that is if you're using just a plain RSC, it could become a perforated case or something that works on your existing case erectors today. Something that will fit within an existing system can be a drop-in. Those are short-term opportunities you've got, and then you can develop the longer term after that. And then I would also look for optimization. Optimization's always going to be your friend in this, and it's going to be the where you have the opportunity to save some money along the way. And it's not going to be necessarily will it be what you initially thought it was going to be. You know, there's a lot of opportunities there. This is what I'm.
And John, we're up against the time. Do you have any quick thoughts on short, medium, or long-term solutions?
I think we've touched on most of them, and in the spirit of staying on time, I think we're good with that. And I see you have up both Chet and my contact information. Happy to take questions, email, phone calls, and work with anybody involved with this to work through the challenges that are out there. But again, I think that the takeaway should be it's an opportunity, and feel free to use us as a resource.
Terrific. So that concludes the panel discussion for today. Thanks to everyone who joined us for it. If you submitted questions which we didn't get to answer yet, we'll email you some detail and some thoughts within a couple days. Please capture these contact details for these gentlemen. Don't forget to download that guide at rovimasrp.com. There's a lot of great detail in there. And finally, both these gentlemen are going to be at PAC Expo next week. And so if you're going to be there and this is a project that you've got on the books or something that you think is coming, you want to just kind of brainstorm it a little bit, by all means, please look them up. Rovima is going to be in the Upper South, booth number 7825. Chet will be roaming the show, but through Rovima, you'll certainly be able to get in touch with both of these guys and have a conversation. So thanks very much. Have a great evening, afternoon, or morning, wherever you are, and look forward to having you in touch with these gentlemen for help. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.